I stepped into the Grand Gallery auction hall, surrounded by whispering elites wearing a cheap suit that drew sneers. The air smelled of expensive perfume and quiet arrogance. I knew I didn't fit their polished mold. My spouse stood near the front, laughing with the gallery's chief patron, a billionaire who looked at me like dirt. The moment our eyes met, the room's temperature seemed to drop to freezing. He smirked, gestured to the security guards, and raised his voice so everyone could hear. He told me I was out of my league, a mere tag-along who didn't belong in a room of real power. But I didn't flinch. I just smiled because they had no idea who I really was. The stakes tonight were higher than anyone in this room could possibly comprehend. This wasn't just an art exhibition. It was a high society battlefield where careers were made or utterly destroyed in minutes. My spouse had spent months preparing for this launch, desperate to secure her position under this ruthless patron's wing. To them, I was just the quiet partner, a shadow who stayed in the background, someone to be tolerated but never respected. They believed my presence was a liability, an embarrassing stain on their perfect evening. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, and utterly delicious. They thought they were holding all the cards, but they didn't realize I had already rewritten the entire game. Let's set the scene properly. This gallery was the playground of the city's most ruthless collectors. The chief patron, Julian, was a man who used his immense wealth to control lives and dictate who succeeded. He had spent the last hour loud-talking about his absolute dominance over the art market. My spouse, desperate for his validation, hung on every single word, completely ignoring my presence. When I had walked over to hand her a program, Julian stopped his conversation, looked at me with pure disgust, and laughed. He openly mocked my background, suggesting I leave before I embarrassed my spouse any further. The crowd joined in his laughter, assuming I would run away in shame. Instead of backing down, I took a slow step forward, maintaining absolute eye contact with the man who thought he owned the room. The whispers around us began to quiet down as people realized I wasn't running. My spouse's face turned pale. She hissed at me to just go, pleading with her eyes to avoid a scene. But the time for hiding in the shadows was officially over. I had spent years building an empire in silence, watching these people mock the working class while preying on creators. I knew every transaction, every secret debt, and every lie that kept this gallery afloat. I let the silence stretch, forcing Julian to sit in his own arrogance. Julian scoffed, waving his hand to summon security. He told the guards that some random nobody had wandered into his private event and needed to be escorted out immediately. My spouse turned her back to me, pretending she didn't even know who I was, to save her own reputation. The guards moved in, their heavy footsteps echoing on the polished marble floor. The crowd watched with smug satisfaction, waiting for the entertaining spectacle of my public humiliation. I didn't move an inch. I looked at the lead guard, then back at Julian, and spoke in a tone that was completely devoid of anger, yet heavy with an undeniable, terrifying authority. "Before you throw me out," I said, my voice cutting through the massive hall, "you might want to check the deed of trust for this entire collection." The security guards froze, sensing a sudden shift in the room's energy. Julian laughed nervously, asking what a beggar could possibly know about trust deeds. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a single, embossed gold card, and tossed it onto the silver tray of a passing waiter. "I bought the debt on this building yesterday morning," I continued calmly, along with 85% of the masterpiece behind that veil. "Technically, Julian, you are standing in my living room talking to my employees." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. You could literally hear the drip of spilled wine from Julian's shattered glass. His smug, color-drenched face rapidly turned an ashen gray as he realized the gravity of my words. My spouse stared at me, her mind frantically trying to connect the quiet, humble person she lived with to the shadow billionaire who owned her entire industry. The wealthy investors in the crowd quickly backed away from Julian, leaving him standing completely isolated in the center of the room. I walked slowly toward the stage, taking my time, letting the weight of my absolute ownership sink deep into everyone's soul. Julian tried to speak, but only a pathetic, high-pitched stammer came out of his mouth. The man who had been a giant just moments ago now looked incredibly small, fragile, and utterly defeated. I looked down at him from the stage, offering a gentle, almost mocking smile. "I believe you mentioned something about people being out of their league tonight, Julian," I said softly into the microphone. "I completely agree. Some people build empires, while others just rent the right to boast inside them." My spouse took a step forward, her voice trembling as she tried to apologize, but I simply held up a single hand, silencing her instantly. I pulled the velvet cord, unveiling the magnificent masterpiece to a room of people who were too stunned to even look at the art. They were all staring at me, the uninvited guest who had just bought their entire world. I didn't stay to enjoy their fake flattery or their desperate apologies. I had delivered the lesson, shattered the illusion of their superiority, and reclaimed my respect. As I walked toward the exit, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, bowing their heads in silent, terrified respect. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving them to pick up the pieces of their broken hierarchy. Power is a quiet weapon, and true authority never needs to scream to be heard. If you enjoyed watching an arrogant billionaire get completely dismantled by the quietest person in the room, then you are going to love what happens next. Click on the video on your screen right now to see another incredible story where a corrupt executive tries to fire an undercover owner, only to realize his entire life is about to be wiped out in seconds. Don't miss this next mind-bending power play. Click that video right now, subscribe to the channel for more epic corporate takedowns, and I will see you over there to witness the ultimate sweet revenge.